Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special installment of the Tuesday Night Lecture Series, sponsored by the Natalie and James Thompson Art Gallery at San Jose State University. This evening is supported by an Artistic Excellence Programming Grant from the College of Humanities and the Arts at San Jose State. My name is Elena Sazad, and I'm the Gallery Director here at SJSU. Tonight, I'm pleased to welcome Iraqi-born artist Wafaa Bilal, art historian Dr. Natalie, and our own cadre faculty member Andrew Blanton, in a panel discussion about Canto 3, a project by Wafaa Bilal to launch a small-scale satellite holding a bust of Saddam Hussein into orbit. Over months of discussions and workshops with students at SJSU and at the University of North Texas, the four of us have worked to develop and refine the satellite while considering the historical, philosophical, and artistic implications of the project. Tonight, you will hear from Wafaa Bilal, Natalie, and Andrew Blanton about the various facets of Canto 3 and have a chance to ask your questions about the project in a Q&A session. I invite you to post comments in the chat throughout the panel, but to make sure to use the Q&A function or the raise hand functions below to ask any questions. Before I introduce Wafaa Bilal, I would like to share a bit of the virtual exhibition that opened today in the New Art City virtual platform. Some of you may have already had a chance to see this, but I invite all of you to take a look after our panel as well. A satellite launch, historical archive, and an expanded conversation on the after effects of dictatorship come together in Canto 3. The work is an anti-monument that parodies a 1990s proposal by Saddam Hussein's followers to launch a golden bust of the despot into orbit. Canto 3 is a parody of monumentality that considers both the hubris and absurdity of the notion that a leader can and should be remembered forever, and the idea that the toppling of a monument can erase past trauma and create a new era. At the same time, Canto 3, in its monumental ascent and eventual reduction to space junk, echoes contemporary conversations regarding the life cycle of public sculpture, all the while evoking the after effects of trauma and the repercussions of authoritarian regimes. Produced as part of Wafaa Bilal's virtual artist residency at the Natalie and James Thompson Gallery, this virtual exhibition presents project documentation, prototypes, and designs for a 2U cube satellite, which will be launched into orbit in 2022. And I really invite you to visit the exhibition in New York City after the panel if you've not done so already. And now, let me introduce the artist of this exhibition and our first speaker of the evening, Wafaa Bilal. Iraqi-born artist Wafaa Bilal is known internationally for his online performative and interactive works, provoking dialogue about international and interpersonal politics. Bilal's work explores tensions between the cultural spaces he occupies, his home in the comfort zone of the US, and his consciousness in the conflict zone in Iraq. For his 2007 installation, Domestic Tension, Bilal spent a month in flat file galleries where people could shoot him via a remote access paintball gun. Using his body as a medium, Bilal continued to challenge the public's comfort zone with projects like Third Eye and Counting. In Counting, in 2010, he created a borderless map of Iraq on his back to represent the pain felt by loved ones who lost someone in war. He was tattooed 5,000 times in red permanent ink to represent American casualties, and 100,000 times in invisible ultraviolet green ink to represent the Iraqi casualties that were largely invisible to the American public. For his piece Third Eye, Bilal had a camera surgically implanted on the back of his head to spontaneously transmit images to the web 24 hours a day, a statement on surveillance, the mundane, and the things we leave behind. His work can be found in the permanent collections of the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Museum of Contemporary Photography in Chicago, the Arab Museum of Modern Art in Doha, Qatar, amongst others. He holds a BFA from the University of New Mexico, an MFA from the School of Art Institute of Chicago, and was conferred an honorary PhD from DePaul University. Bilal is currently an arts professor at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. And now, please join me in welcoming Wafaa Bilal.
Elena, thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. And I wanted to start by thanking Andrew as well and Neda for the 1 month long conversation about all of the issues you have mentioned. Also, I wanted to thank San Jose State University for giving us this opportunity, and Natalie and James Thompson Gallery for hosting both the virtual show and the physical show, and of course New City as well. I am going to share my presentation with you uh, right now. Let's see. What I am going to talk about today is a reflection on the project, how the project evolved from its inception until today. I see the project is a very dynamic, and I uh, uh, intentionally um, make sure that is once people involved in it, they become part of the collective writing of this project. To begin with, uh, Saddam was an omnipresent in Iraq, and I lived under Saddam's regime for so many years until 1990. And I mentioned before in previous talk that is, it was we idolized the regime in every way as kids, and we saw it as a new way of living in Iraq. All of a sudden, as young people, we were enabled by the regime to have the power that nobody else has. The return is an absolute faith and allegiance to the regime. Saddam's image was everywhere, and that was by design. The only space Saddam did not occupy is the space that's above us. His image remained ingrained in our present. But at some point, the Ba'ath regime introduced this idea of idolizing Saddam beyond earth and elevating him to heaven. And that's where the proposal come by creating a statue of him, launch it into the space, geosynchronize it above Iraq. So every time that is Iraqis lift their head, they will see that is shining a star up on them. So Saddam and his regime did not realize that I left Iraq in 1991, and for so many years, that idea stayed with me. Um, and the time came in 2015 to bring this back. In 2015, I start thinking about what happened after the dust settled. When can we reconcile the past and move beyond it? But it's really tough to pose these questions once uh, we have not moved as a collective uh, society. We did not move beyond Saddam and his reign and his regime and his control of our mind. And I thought, what if we, as a symbolic gesture, what if I, as an artist, realize that monument and realize the wish of Saddam's and the Ba'ath Party. And part of the idea was to let go. And so I selected this one because this one has loaded of meaning. To begin with, Saddam is wearing the helmet that is represent the rock, the dome of the rock, as his wish to become the another Salahuddin and a free Palestine. I went on to hire um, uh, people in the studio to create the bust, but at that time in 2015, it was still a 3 foot long, and the idea was really to take this one and launch it into the space to end up in um, above Iraq or orbiting the planet. But then I come to realization there something else need to be done. If we are talking about trauma, and we have to filter this the project through a local um, anecdote and a relation to Iraq. And of course, it couldn't be a better relation than to think about the veterans, American who fought in Iraq, came back with no care, no health care, no jobs. And I thought it is ironic how first in this country we think of these fighters as heroes, but once they arrive, they're not anymore. And of course, what they have uh, in relation to Iraqis, they have the trauma and the post-traumatic stress disorder. So I wanted to raise awareness of their condition, um, and in a controversial move now, I hired them for less than minimum wage to come to my studio and produce these kits, sculpture from bookends to candle holders. And once they produce them, they will sign the bottom of these. Of course, the veteran community were not very happy with this move, thinking I'm trying to use um, them. But on the contrary, creating the controversy was very much a strategy of engagement on my part. And I continue my conversation about their trauma, about their post-traumatic stress disorder. And the only difference between the veterans and the Iraqis, for the veterans, the guns fall silent. So their post-traumatic stress disorder is at full swing, while Iraqis guns around them have not fall silent. So I wanted to address it in parallel, the parallel situation between these two places, between these two groups of people.
Wafaa, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think your slides are not switching over.
They're not. Okay, hold on. Yeah, that was okay. Alana, can you see them now?
Yes, yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, so these are the images from the studios. I invited veterans to talk to them about where they serve, what their memories, and I was really surprised by how much of the Iraqi culture it remained with them. Once that is done, I wanted to take this project to another dimension, which is a commentary on how conflict being monetized. And in the Armory show in 2015, I set up a boutique show just like collectible items that is the veterans work for pennies to be sold for thousands of dollars. And the setup here was intentional. Part of using or minimizing the dictator statue into these bookends, candle holders, is really to minimize its effect and make it an omnipresent, but in a very different way, is to minimize its effect on our psyche. Uh, at that point, I faced another hurdle, which is the bust weight about 250 pounds. And I figure the cost of sending this into the upper orbit, it will be immense. And I wouldn't be able to do it. So I switched. And you could see how the project is really evolving. It's a very dynamic one. I start thinking about even shrinking the one I shrinked already. And now I'm start thinking about a CubeSat. CubeSat is about 6 inches by 6 inches, and start sketching what would be the new vision for this sculpture. And of course, the idea of Saddam's and uh, selfie would be only appropriate because I thought Saddam will love to be in the space, sending selfies from the space. And that become the new idea, is to design it where a camera will take an image, send it to an Earth every 1 hour. And that's where the collaboration took another turn with Alina, with Andrew, with Nada, with San Jose State University, and Natalie and James Thompson, by having another platform. This platform is really about the design. I'm not going to go into that because I think Andrew is, I know Andrew and Nada will talk more about it. But for a month long, and many of you witnessed that, we engage in a conversation about what is a monument, what is its effect, what happened after the monument toppled, and then about Iraqi culture. So all of that and inform me about how the project keep evolving. Specifically, now we are talking about topple monument in the state and what to do with them. All of these events and the project evolve even more with the conversation of Elena and Andrew when they propose the question, is this project going to alienate Iraqi people? And I thought very long about that question. And I thought, if the original idea is to put Saddam in the space, in the upper orbit for eternity, fail. Now we're putting Saddam on a CubeSat and put him in the lower orbit, and will stay for maximum a year, a few months, we don't know. What's in it for the Iraqi? And how is that going to address the Iraqi issue? And then I came up with the idea of this project is not going just to be about Saddam and letting the past, of course. This project is anchored in the idea of visiting the past and talking about the trauma of the past. Also, it become very important to bring awareness, international awareness, and conversation about the nature of these oppressive regime and how they become about. Um, then the idea of addressing the Iraqi future and reconciliation, this project function as a trigger for that conversation and accepting the past in order to let it go. And finally, um, I know that is the satellite will come and burn into the atmosphere of the planet, and it will be uh, a very poetic gesture to the past by letting it go as well. One thing remained for sure during the show, we are collecting Iraqi artifact and significant artifact to culture, Iraqi culture, such as song, such as recipes, images, and so on. And once the satellite is up in the space for that amount of time, it will send bursts of sound that represent these objects. So it will immortalize the culture for eternity. Plus, that collection of Iraqi culture, it will function as an archive that lives on um, in the gallery for a physical show, and later on hoping will exist in the publication. With that, I'm gonna stop and hand it back to Alina.
Thank you so much, Wafaa, and we look forward to discussing the project more. Right now, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Nada Shaboot. Dr. Shaboot is a Regent Professor of Art History and the coordinator of the Contemporary Arab and Muslim Cultural Studies Initiative at the University of North Texas. She is the founding president of the Association for Modern Contemporary Art from the Arab World, Iran, and Turkey. She's the author of Modern Arab Art, Formation of Arab Aesthetics, co-editor of New Vision, Arab Art in the 21st Century, and Modern Art in the Arab World, Primary Documents. She is also founding director of Modern Art Iraq Archive. Welcome, Nada.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elena and Wafaa and Andrew and Cynthia for all the help that you have given us so far organizing. It has been an amazing month. Lots of my students who are in the audience attending have been enjoying the conversations that we've been having, but I think mostly, at least I think, we have enjoyed it the most. Definitely I have. But what it has already, what it did is also allow us to contemplate more what this project can do and what this project could mean to a larger audience outside of the art world as well. So I want to look, here's what I want to do for my part of the presentation. I want to put Wafaa's work in larger context that has to do with what I am calling, and I'm going to share, acts of healing that Wafaa has been sort of performing through his work. Maybe didn't start as such, maybe that was not the intention at the beginning, but it certainly sort of evolved into that. I actually first met Wafaa at the Montalvo Art Center in California in 2007. It was the Iraq Reframe project that was organized by Regine Sahakian, and I had curated an exhibition, moments from Iraqi history, modernism. And so I went there for the opening of the exhibition. When I arrived, there was a buzz in the air that Wafaa wanted to blow up this house that he had been building with the community, and they were looking into the legality of it. Can they do such a thing? Is it legal to blow up the structure or not? So definitely, and this was the first time I see Wafaa, and definitely grabbed my attention, not just because he's very handsome, and he is, but also because his projects sort of, act as more than what they are, as sort of, the art projects. They provoke through using a wide web of references. So for example, this project, and on the project website, they actually describe it as El Dar al Iraqi, which means the Iraqi house. is a temporary rural structure built by artist Wafaa Bilal on the front lawn of Montalvo with the support of community volunteers. The structure is symbolic of the type of homes built and inhabited by Iraqis living in rural and impoverished areas prior to the modernization period of the 1950s and beyond. And there's more description of about the Iraqi house and the historical references it brings. But this piece immediately spoke of devastation of the civil and domestic infrastructure that was taking place in Iraq at that moment of time and continues till today. It creates an environment that has forced the inhabitants to return to pre-modern existence. So this structure became something of more significance. And the idea of displaced Iraqis and having temporary lives sort of became even more acute following the 2003 invasion. So this kind of project, I saw that it blurs the borders between the personal, what the artist wants to do, and the collective, which speaks of a larger aspects of the communities. So on a personal level, this has a lot to do with Wafaa's own experience of having to build such a structure when he was in Saudi Arabia at the Rafah camp in a refugee camp, and had to kind of create a home for himself. So there is this sort of, this is 1991 at the first Gulf War. So there is this sort of, personal act of building a home that is displaced and speaks of that displacement. But also, through this act, even when was in Saudi Arabia, he kind of invoked several layers and issues that connects to Iraq's history. It connects with heritage, something Iraqi artists inside of Iraq and in diaspora continue to do. It invokes Sumerian history because this baked clay brick with the reference to Sumerian structures and a civilization that was established around 3500 BC, and its remnant continues to be present in Iraq today. The reference not only speaks of building a civilization, but to continuity in history, but also of repurposing, because then this kind of structure also spoke of modernism, the displacement of rural Iraq through modernism, a sort of very aggressive period in Iraq's history, and sort of relocation into the city of Baghdad and having to build sort of temporary structures, not even as nice as the one that Wafaa built. So it equally spoke of plundering history, destruction, loss of memory, because, in the post-invasion period. So this sort of sense of loss of knowledge of the Sumerian, because of the destruction of various sites, ancient sites in Iraq before they were fully excavated, exacerbates sort of the idea of loss in Iraq for Iraqis. Wafaa's following projects kind of continued this line of thinking. I still remember very well, and I have said this before when I was talking about his work, when I was interviewing him for the New Vision book, he replied to a question that I no longer recall because it seemed, the question was not as memorable as the reply that kind of stayed with me. He said, an artist does not have the privilege to meditate on aesthetics alone. And this is definitely even more so when we're speaking of an Iraqi artist. He said at the time that, for example, if he's an activist and art is his language. If he knew how to write well, he would be a journalist and, he would be expressing his message that way. I am certainly happy that he chose art over journalism. But his work from his early projects aimed to implicate and force audience into uncomfortable places of questioning, reflecting, thinking beyond the personal. He always engages his audience and forces them into a position. You kind of have to choose, you have to decide on the idea or the topic or the issue that he presents us with. He uses technology, public space, and media to derive his point and message and deliver it. While he directs his propagation towards American audience, his projects equally perform acts of healing for both himself as an Iraqi diaspora person, but also for the Iraq as a country. He thus shapes his work to transport politics into accessible codes of understanding through interaction. His themes do explore psychology and effects of war, displacements, loss, trauma, absence in general, and also examine relationships between proximity and distance. I think Wafaa's distance from Iraq, current distance from Iraq, only connects him more to what is happening inside of Iraq. And we see this happening more so in his later projects. So his work opens up spaces for discourse on deeper and more complex levels than simple narratives presented. It's not just about Saddam, but it's about life around Saddam and after Saddam and Iraqis at this moment of time and their own sort of way of healing. So these spaces have conflictual emotions and are complicated by the experiences and relationships. One of the projects that Elena just mentioned, and counting, in which he sort of, uses his body, and increasingly Wafaa uses his body as sort of the site, as the canvas of the work, or, the site specific, let's say, of the work, where, he is in it addressing loss for both Americans and Iraqis. He is mapping the country of Iraq. So there is a map and cities. So he's putting into reality, or bringing into presence those Iraqi cities that may have not, been known throughout. Everyone hears about Iraq in the news, but the actual specific cities do not necessarily know, beyond maybe, one or two for specific reasons. But more than, and he's using two different inks, one that is visible for the American dead soldiers, and one that is only visible under black light for the dead Iraqi soldiers, whom have been forgotten and are absent from the whole discussion about loss and death of Iraqi soldiers, even from the count. At the time, there were 5,000 dead American soldiers that are presented by red dots, and 100,000 Iraqi casualties that were represented by dots of green UV ink. So in that, he is not only bringing them back to life, and especially he also had someone reading the names as he was being tattooed. And so, feeling the pain himself, that expresses the pain of the loss for the families, but bringing them back to life through this sort of memorializing of them. But he also joined it as part of his activism, where he was collecting donations, $1 from per viewer, to actually have money that he can contribute to the at the time it was to give to the group Rally for Iraq and fund scholarships for American and Iraqis who has lost parents in the war. So there's always that healing aspect, even when he is going through the actual pain of the memory itself. But then slowly he opened up to where it's not just the projects are, addressing more the Iraqis, while we all see these images, for example, in the Ashes series that we've seen on TV, different in the news, of places that were bombed and destroyed. But actually what this project also equally does, it forces Iraqis to confront these issues, to confront these spaces. These are spaces that were of privilege. So where, Iraqi individuals were not able to go there. These are places that had to do with the life of Saddam. It's as if, Wafaa kind of worked inside from the outside in to the bust of Saddam, to the actual figure of Saddam, by exploring first the spaces that speak of loss and absence specifically. Again, here's that sort of theme of absence that we see in his work increasingly. But it also reclaims it on a very different level. Now, these are not places of the privileged. They are actually ghost spaces, ghost towns, where they speak mostly of death, but equally of destruction. Again, while these were places for Saddam and his goons, they are also places in Iraq as well. So this notion of navigating cultural destruction and what can be done with it is something we see specifically in this one project. Now I'm going to play a clip because I think Wafaa himself presents this project better than I can speak of it. Just one second.
During the invasion of Iraq in 2003, the College of Fine Art at the University of Baghdad lost their entire library to looters who set fire to the collection. Over 70,000 titles were destroyed. To this day, its students have few books to study from. For my exhibition at the Art Gallery of Windsor, I'm building a system of exchange that will connect people directly with each other in order to resurrect the College of Fine Arts Library. Viewers like yourself will be a critical part of this exchange. Your participation in this Kickstarter will replace the white box in my exhibition with the new educational textbooks. The donation will enable us to purchase books from a list compiled by the faculty. In exchange, donors will receive a limited edition artist book from the exhibition. At the end of the exhibition, all donated books will be shipped to the College of Fine Art at the University of Baghdad to begin rebuilding their library. Baghdad has faced such cultural destruction before. During the Islamic Golden Age in the 13th century, an invading Mongol army set fire to all libraries in Baghdad, including the famed House of Wisdom. Legend says the House of Wisdom library was thrown into the Tigris River to create a bridge of books for the army to cross. The pages bled ink into the river for 7 days, at the end of which the books were drained of knowledge. But when the books stopped bleeding, the people of Baghdad started rebuilding their city. With your help, we can come together to rectify cultural violence and begin the process of rebuilding Iraq for future generations. Thank you for participating.
So in this project, and I am happy to show my copy of the limited edition as well. In this project, again, Robert continues the research aspect of his work. He's equally researching in the past and the present. He's looking at history, episodes in history, revisiting, destruction of Iraq's history, but also its trajectory, its historical continuity, as well as the current destruction. I actually was at the College of Fine Arts in 2003 and saw the actual burnt library. It is heart-wrenching to see that many books destroyed. So imagine the image with the Mongol destruction of that. But so, through doing this sort of activist project, which on the one hand is forcing us out here to contribute, but it's also forcing the Iraqis inside to contemplate and consider their situation. That library in Iraq, in Baghdad at the college, actually was burned, I was told, by the Baathists as they were evacuating prior to the invasion, because it may have revealed stolen books in the library. From the invasion of Kuwait. So this is a very sort of complicated web of implications that are invoked in a project that is an ongoing project as it grew into different iterations. So the idea of opening up these spaces for the Iraqis to think about their past, because as Wafaa said, Saddam has been sort of, a larger than life persona that we lived under the shadows of whom we lived under the shadows for so long. The image of Saddam, indestructible, surrounded the Iraqis everywhere in the city, surrounded us. We were telling stories through the month of, personal interaction with the situation where, these sort of monuments of Saddam or the legacies of Saddam, the photos of Saddam and his family were everywhere in the city, to the point that in the city and our homes, to the point that you no longer see them, but they're there, they're watching, they're protecting, because like Wafaa said, Iraqis idealized their rulers, and including Saddam at a time. Saddam brought water everywhere in the country, electricity, transformed the country into a sort of middle class, largely middle class. These are things that spoke well of him to the Iraqis. Sure, so you couldn't criticize and you couldn't say anything against him, but okay, where else is a true democracy to the point that one can live free? So they looked up to all these programs that he instituted, and his image that was towering all over the city, to the point that even when he was defeated, even those who opposed him kind of, were uneasy about the situation. Even when he was captured, Iraqis were not 100% sure that he really is going to go away. Even when he was executed, Iraqis didn't believe he's gone. So the idea that, his legacy, his presence continues because of who he was. But then, following the 2003 de-Baathification policies of erasing him from the history, from textbook, removing all evidence of him, actually are equally problematic, because, as Wafaa also said, it did not allow Iraqis time or space to deal with it, to confront it, to figure out who is Saddam, what is my relationship to Saddam now, and some of the more images of where, as you can see, people are just like, he's there, he's everywhere. People just sort of interact with him as if he doesn't exist, but aware always that he is there. So in Canto 3, what Wafaa does, he does not only sort of demystify the image of Saddam by commercializing him, by making him into sort of, kitsch images instead of the glorified images of him here wearing the Saladin helmet, which reference him as the leader of the Arabs and puts him in he as you saw him from all these photos before, he was very good about placing himself in Arab and Islamic lineage. So to announce himself as the new savior of the Muslim world, of the Arab world, depending on the time and what is needed. So this is quite symbolic. It is the Dome of the Rock on his head. It is the reference to the past. It's the reference to defeating the Crusaders. It's the reference of his strength and power that then Wafaa takes and squishes. All of a sudden, this is an object, this sort of the legacy of this man becomes something you hold in your hand. It is, gold or silver or colored through the different sort of iteration of Canto 3, where, you're all of a sudden now forced as an Iraqi to think, how do I think of Saddam? You are forced to think about him and reevaluate your relationship, and moving forward, possibly find a way of healing of all the sort of horror that you lived under with him being your leader. So the project then, it reimagines an episode into a new sort of story and narrative, a creation of a new myth that on the other hand, reshapes the image and the memory of Saddam into something else by allowing Iraqis to send different contemplations or messages to space with him. It's a closure of sorts, of coming to term to how he made the country arrive at this point of destruction that the country of Iraq is in now, and hopefully finding reconciliation as we move forward. And I'm going to stop here and look forward to discussion.
Thank you so much, Nada. One second. Our next speaker tonight is Andrew Blanton. Blanton is an associate professor in the Cadre Media Labs at San Jose State University. His work has been performed and presented around the world at venues such as the Google Cultural Lab in Paris, the University of Brasilia, the City University of Hong Kong, and STIM Amsterdam, among others. His current work focuses on the emergent potential between cross-disciplinary arts and technology in the context of music composition, new media art, and building sound and visual environments through software development. Andrew has advanced expertise in percussion, 3D environments, graphics programming, creative software development, and developing projects in the confluence of art and science. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Elena. Let me share my screen here. We can get started. So I think everybody can see that, and I'll move you guys off of here. And so I won't be too long because I know we're getting short on time this evening, but I did want to say, a few things, that it's a really special project. And it's really interesting to think about how it's evolved in this time of pandemic and everything that's happened really over the course of the last, I think, year or so that we've been here. So we started, I think the project initially came out of a conversation between Aaron Wilder, I believe, and myself, who was here this evening. And it was a bit of a talk of like, well, do you think we can get, Wafaa to, come in? It'd be amazing if we can get him to SJSU. And then we extended the invitation, and it sort of serendipitously all started to line up, which was amazing. And Wafaa, initially came in and said, well, I have, these sort of two project proposals that I'm thinking about. And, one is this one idea, and then this other one happens to be a satellite that we could launch. And he said, a satellite, that's amazing. Can we try and do that? It'd be incredible. And it sounded incredibly challenging at the time. And I had begun a conversation also with Professor Emeritus Joel Slayton, and sort of, I think there's a history in Cadre of these really ambitious projects that are amazing. And Joel, I believe, launched a satellite at some point in this space. So we began having a conversation around it, which was really spectacular. And at the same time, Wafaa was telling me the story of, what does it mean to have a dictator who sees themselves as, they wanted to have the original bust of Saddam Hussein launched into orbit to be geosynchronously placed as a golden star over the sky in Iraq, from my understanding of it. And so, like Saddam Hussein's, libidinal aspirations of authoritarianism and this sort of all viewing, encompassing idea, and the political structure of space and what it means to even go into space has also been a kind of important part of this whole thing. So, as a technologist, and thinking about how I can somehow help to launch this thing and buttress the development of this, we started a conversation with the students to really think about what the actual pipeline needs to be, what the ask would be, and what that looks like to build a satellite in this way. So we do have the satellite that is itself in orbit. Then we have the downlink to the base station. They have a base station on the top of the industrial studies building over here at San Jose State. So we were thinking about, what does it mean to get signal from the satellite itself to the base station, then have software that can decode that downlinked message and then push that into the Thompson Gallery. So that's kind of the big ask there, and thinking about what was possible, what all was needed to make this happen. So we started down a process with the students of compiling all the parts for a satellite and looking at what it really needs. So we kind of came up with the 5 main components, and you'll notice that this also excludes 2 important components from this exploded model, which you'll see in New Art City when you traverse that space. But this is also not including the motherboard and comms. So you can see that we do have a comms antenna on the bottom, but it's not including the motherboard as well, which are 2 other things that we'll talk about. But to get the whole thing started, it was, well, how do you launch a bust into space, and what would be needed? So we really started with the chassis, and we started with the CubeSat kit chassis. Interestingly, as a part of this dialogue, we were doing a lot of explorations, and I think one of the students of Dr. Raja Malena, Chandra, pointed me to this website, which I think, speaking of the type of politics surrounding space and what that means, how a lot of this technology is only accessible to certain people in certain countries. This group, Sat Search, basically was a refutation to that whole narrative, and saying, well, what happens if we open up a platform for the general audience to be able to search these satellite components and start to source satellite components? So that became another really interesting part of it. And this CubeSat kit, I will say also, is another really interesting sort of kit for learning about cube satellites. So we started with the CubeSat kit chassis as a way to work through it, and we took a model of this, and we heavily modified it to support the sculpture inside of it. So that's sort of the first main component. Then we have the power supply, which we modeled also inside of this. That's a fairly mundane model. The camera, we went through a number of different camera options. This is a type of camera that's built for space, and the crystal place, like micro cameras, is really quite interesting. And I think that the one of the concepts that I've come away with in understanding about satellite construction is that they're not that different from contemporary computers, right? And it makes sense if you think about the technology behind all this stuff. Is that, you know, we build computers, and the computers have these basically like, you know, Lego parts that you put together as far as a computer goes. So you have, you know, your motherboard, you have your RAM, you have your power supply, you have your case. The satellite in itself is not that different, where you have, you know, the chassis, which is like the case, then you have a power supply, and you have a motherboard, you have flight controls on your motherboard, and you have comms that will send typically like X-band or UHF radio to the surface of the Earth. So we were looking at these things. We also began modeling an antenna, which is included, you can see on the bottom here, of the chassis. And so this led to, I think we were looking at the Nano Avionics UHF antenna system in this case, but looking at a number of different types of antennas that would fit. And one of the learning processes also of this was, and how did I forget the ACDS? Okay, so one of the other important components of this is you'll notice that these antennas point out in 4 directions, and that's to deal with the tumbling of the satellite itself through orbit. So one of the challenges, if we wanted to frame out Saddam Hussein and then have a camera with the Earth in the background, then how would that happen? And so one of the ideas being that we would have a satellite that needed to be stationary in orbit, and it couldn't really tumble. Tumbling would be bad. And so that requires another component that we've modeled called the ADCS, and that's the attitude control of the satellite itself, which consists of an X, Y, and a Z gyroscope. And so as this thing starts to tumble, those gyroscopic motors spin really fast and then pull the satellite into position. And so I don't want to take up too much time, but I'll point to this last thing. Oh, well, we have the solar panels too. So assuming that we would need power up there. And so I guess this whole idea then opened up into a prototyping space. And I think, you know, at some point I had an extra space in New Art City that Donna generously, you know, allowed me to use for prototyping for a minute. And I told the students, I said, well, why don't we just start prototyping and building this satellite in this space so we can start to understand it. And that process actually became quite helpful and informative of what we needed to do, because all of a sudden, when we're in this simulated space and we have Saddam Hussein's bust and we have a camera and the light of the earth is incredibly bright, just from the basic skybox in this space, we realize that, oh, well, lighting might be an issue in this, and then we need to start thinking about lighting of the sculpture itself and what that means. And different types of simulation technologies have really changed the understanding of how these things get built and other considerations that we might not have had otherwise. So it was a really interesting process to begin building this model of the satellite, and I think you can now see that. I think if I go here, this is in the preview mode, so I think I should be fine if I can go into this real quick. Of course, I'm not logged in. Why don't I just go to the show itself? And just like, maybe this is a good place to hand this off. I don't know if we have time for conversation. I should probably end here. But in the show itself that you'll see, okay, don't mind me fumble through my login really fast. Let's go here and go here. So in the show itself, I think as you all go around this space and explore, you can see a number of things, including the exploded model that the students built of these models. So these were all student projects, by the way. I don't think I mentioned that, but all the students were going through the process of modeling this and building out the satellite components, which is interesting. And you'll see over here, right here somewhere, unless it got moved, oh, there it is, the link to the actual model that we were working with the students to build. So this model of Saddam in space was kind of one of the working models of the, this was our prototyping environment, basically. So anyway, I'll end there, and yeah, y'all can go into the space and check it out. It's interesting.
Thank you so much, Wafaa, Nada, and Andrew, for these fascinating presentations that I know probably opened a lot of questions for our attendees today. So I'd like to open the panel for a Q&A. I know a few people have already started posting questions using the Q&A function below. You can also use the raise hand function as well. One kind of early question that we had, and Wafaa, this is to you, is can you speak a little bit more about the symbolism behind the bust? I think those of us who've been working with this for some time are now really familiar with it, but it is something that immediately kind of strikes the viewer. And so most notably, the asker asks about the helmet.
So thank you very much for the question. Saddam was, like many dictators and really strong leaders in the region, believe in history and in immortalizing himself and finding a place where nobody could escape him. And if you look carefully at a bust, with the exception of what strike you, as Alina mentioned, is the helmet. So understanding history of Iraq, you have to understand there are two times where leaders in Iraq go outside Iraq and free the land of Palestine we know of now. First one was Nebuchadnezzar from Babylon, and the second one is Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi. He's also Iraqi Kurdish. Saddam wanted to be or position himself as the third leader of the Arab world coming out of Iraq to free Palestine. And I think the Arab world completely believe in that myth. So what you see an artist render of Saddam's bust, and then he placed the helmet as the dome of the Iraq, which has a significant meaning into the Islamic world as well. And I highly encourage people to go and look into the significance of the Dome of the Rock to the Islamic faith because of Prophet Muhammad and his ascendance to heaven through that Quran surah Al-Isra wal Mi'raj. So I'll stop at that.
Thank you, Wafaa. And let me just say that for those of you who have not been inside of New York City, go in and take a look at the busts as they appear inside of New York City. There are a few actually pretty lengthy explanations that Wafaa has written about the significance of the bust and the use of the Dome of the Rock helmet that you can really kind of start to engage with a little bit more inside of the exhibition. My next question is to you, Nada, but I think also to everyone on the panel. You spoke really eloquently about the way in which Wafaa uses domestic environments as these kind of contact zones between his own personal experiences and the larger experience of the Iraqi people. And he's also kind of extended what it means to be kind of on the border between inside and outside that he's constantly playing with in his work. And I'm wondering, as we push this CubeSat out into space, this completely other area that has not yet been explored to the extent that the gallery spaces or interior spaces have, how does that change the relationships that Wafaa has set up in other works? So, the provocations that we had seen prior that are really provocations to an American public at the same time as being more of a comfort to an Iraqi public. How do those things change when we are looking at a work in outer space? Who are we actually kind of talking to? And where does that now situate Wafaa?
So I mean, that's an excellent question. But I think first also we have to consider that there's the virtual space, right? That, there's this space we're in now and Art City, New Art City, where this project is existing and is accessible on a level beyond a gallery or a museum, right? Because now us, people in Iraq, people around the world can access it. And the total opposite will be when the bus goes to space, where it is inaccessible to anyone. So I think actually, and maybe, I'm not sure if this would have happened before without COVID, that, we're occupying this virtual space, that you're doing this exhibition. I mean, maybe there would have been a very different sort of life imagined for this project, but I think it's actually ideal in this case. So it actually then acts, this space, the virtual space, the discussions, the archival material, the engagement, virtual engagements, this acts as the therapeutic process for the Iraqis, right? Because they are engaged with it from their comfort places, because, we're at home doing this, engaging with this. And so it actually very intimate in terms of this relationship and this enactment that then goes into a whole different sphere, and then it's gone, right? I mean, it's transmitting back, but Saddam is gone. He's in space and he's gonna crash upon return. So there's all that symbolism that acts as part of the project itself in the process of it. And I think this is a project way more than, the objects are great, but, it's the process of it.
Thank you. Wafaa, do you have anything to add about space as a contact zone?
No, really, I think Nada put it in a very wonderful way. But we didn't plan on having a virtual space. I mean, Andrew knows. We plan to have a station in the gallery to receive the images and then either project it and so on. But that's what I love about this project. It's how it keep evolving, right? And every time it evolved with new players, there is a new story, and the conversation become more and more inclusive. I a few weeks ago I presented to in the University of Qadisiyah in Iraq just to see what was the reaction. And I was really surprised how open-minded people, specifically when it comes to having the national conversation about the past, because Iraqi have not had it. One conflict after another. But I think it might be painful, but we can't pass that pain unless we address it.
So following on that, someone asks, you mentioned that the satellite will be sending cultural content, recipes, stories, etc. How will this information be picked, chosen by you to go inside the CubeSat, and then how will it be received on Earth? Or how are we going to, really create that conversation?
Yeah, I could mention something and then I'll hand it to Andrew as well if he wants to add something. So we are going to establish a platform for people to submit anything that is remind them of Iraqi culture, and what that submission it will have a verification step, at least one, before it goes public. Then there are two fold in it. One fold, it stay in the digital format. And then the second, and that is going to be on display in the gallery. You could, Elena, you could talk about that as well. Thinking of unfolding that digital code into a physical one to accommodate a physical show. And then that is itself, it might be turned into a book. But when it comes to these sound bursts into the universe, going to turn the digital code into a sound wave. And then once the satellite is in place in orbit, it will send these bursts of sound. At the same time, on Earth, we will know what it's being just sent and its significant through the website. Andrew, you want to add anything?
I just want to say that also, like, there was this question of the dimensions of the CubeSat as well. It's a 2U CubeSat, so those are a 2-unit CubeSat as opposed to the 1-unit CubeSat, which I think Wafaa you had originally prototyped and built out. And the other question, will this be geostatic or geosynchronous? No, this is going to be a standard orbital rotation around the globe. And so that's an interesting issue too, because we have one base station here at San Jose State. And then we were talking about potentially getting another base station in partnership with Dr. Sean Sway, who used to teach here at San Jose State and is now at in Arab Emirates, leading an aerospace program over there. So if we could get, a period like twice per orbit of images that were downlinked from the satellite, that gets into sort of the technical gritty of it, I think, as far as the images are concerned. But then, yeah, I think there is the poetics of what goes into space too, as Wafaa was mentioning. And
Andrew, I believe if we wanted to have a geosynchronized it has to have a thruster, and that it get complicated, right?
Yeah. It's I think, and we're explicitly, we're also in a low Earth orbit too. We're not going up super high compared to some satellites. So that's it's a really interesting set of technical questions that surround the project.
If I may add just quickly, in relation to the cultural, messages that are sent, or anything of significance, that equally is a process of healing. As you think about the issue, what is it that you would want to send as expressive of you, your culture, your trauma, your loss, and then sending that to space as in, sort of like a psychological experiment of writing it down. It's the actual act of doing it that becomes sort of the healing process as well for Iraqis. But to also, on another level, think about identity. Because when you think about all these things, you're also thinking about what does it mean to be an Iraqi today? How do you think of your Iraqiness or your relationship to the country or the culture or the heritage, in midst of all that has transpired since?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think also address Elena and Andrew when they said, okay, so what else in it for the Iraqis? Because if this is going to be the first Iraqi satellite in space, it can't be just of Saddam, right? So that is the new layer was born from this collaboration with San Jose State University is, well, what's going to be there is the Iraqi culture, and what's fade away is the past.
Yeah, I think, bringing it back to the earlier point about space as a new contact zone, one of the things that we discussed too as a group is that the difference in what space means today than what it meant in the 1990s, in terms of who has access and how you can have access. And even the fact that Wafaa chose this CubeSat form that was developed in an educational setting. And yet at the same time, with a certain amount of money, you can send just about anything into space right now. Wafaa and myself, at some point, we were shopping around at, who's going to launch our CubeSat. And so there is this other kind of layer to it of being able to really kind of weed through all of these questions of what belongs in space. On a practical level, I think a few people are asking, how will we collect and solicit some of these narratives? We will be soliciting them through the Thompson Gallery as well as through Wafaa's own website. And Wafaa will actually have to go through and take a look and vet every single thing that comes in. So it will take some time, but we're seeing this, and we've seen it from the beginning, as an ever evolving project. And so some of these things will appear as they start to come into Wafaa's inbox. They're going to start to appear in the New Art City exhibition, which will be live for about a year, and we'll continue to add to it. Others will be displayed in the physical exhibition when we have that in the Thompson Gallery once the launch takes place. And yet others will be broadcast in space. And so it's really about thinking of all of these different sites of contact simultaneously and having that conversation. So please watch out for that. We have a very interesting question here, Wafaa, for you. Someone writes, as we heard about the dictatorship, I couldn't help but compare it to religion, the fear, shaming, and pressure to not question. Do you ever explore the potential religious correlation in your artwork?
What does that mean?
Does the questioner want to ask a follow-up? I think, this is actually kind of close to what we were talking about in Nada's seminar earlier this week, the kind of similarities between political dictatorships and the way that monuments are used, or at least this is the way I'm understanding this question, and that art can be used in political dictatorships and the way that it's used in religion. At the same time, there's someone asked kind of a follow-up question about, the ways in which you transgress religious boundaries in your own work. So in the ways in which you utilize tattoos and in accounting, even though it's forbidden in Islam. So take it either way.
Yeah, okay, I don't know if I'm been able to wrap my mind around the question. I think it's a big question, but what I could say is uh, really culture came up with whether it's a monument or whether it's a person, and whether it's abstract idea of higher power, is to cope, right? And coping could be coping against nature, which that is what many people refer to into the first invention of God, whether we accept that fact or not. With dictators, I think there is fear associated with the invention of the dictator, because dictator does not just appear. Slowly, they're built by fear underlining uh, from associated with others threaten that society. So uh, I hope that answer, but maybe I could refer that to Neda and see if she has a better answer than this.
um, Actually, I think a lot of this has to do with, Wafa's relationship to religion. Religion in Iraq as culture, as opposed to what some of the questions are asking in terms of Islam as the hegemonic religion. Now, Wafa grew up actually in a very sort of culturally religious atmosphere that was very much, daily life. It wasn't about the actual religious act, but it was about the rituals of them. So to him, they are part of life. But also, if we look at the culture of Iraq and the idea of tattoo, the rural, women, I mean, there are songs in Iraq about the tattoo, Degga bil Hinaj. This is a tattoo. So tattoos are part of the culture. So this sort of idea of religion in the abstract or in the open or in its purest form as practiced as Islam is problematic, because you will find that the practice of Islam varies from one place to the other. And Iraq as a country has always had an interesting relationship with religion. It kept a lot of the rituals, but it was also very secular understanding of what religion is. And so in that sense is where actually Wafa's relationship comes to within, not with religion, because it's not about having a relationship with religion, but it's about how religion has infiltrated the culture in different manifestation. Is that a good answer, Wafa?
I think it's a great answer, and it would give me a window to elaborate a little bit. I think when it comes to performance art and specifically using the body, I wasn't aware of it. And I think I first came aware of it after shooting Iraqi. And when people ask me, where is that coming from, commemorating or soliciting empathy? And it was really immediately I went back in history, uh, watching the ritual of Ashura in Iraq, when literally people commemorating and reenacting the Battle of Karbala. So it wasn't, I didn't thought about them together, but it does. I mean, the ritual, as Neda said, influence us, whether consciously or subconsciously.
And again, not to really think of it from either religious or sectarian perspective, but rather just lived experience and visuals of the culture that remain with everyone.
So a question here for both Wafa and Nada. How do you see this project about the past authoritarian regime relating to the current situation in Iraq? And do you see Western people as the main audience or Iraqi people?
Neda, you want to take that, or you want me to take that?
No, go ahead. You're the artist.
Thanks a lot, historian. Well, I really think the project is about both cultures, not just one. We talked about how this project a trigger to dig into the past of Iraqis and reconcile in the future. But at the same time, at some point it was a trigger to talk about veterans and their relation to war and their struggle in lack of jobs or healthcare. But at the same time, it's about connection of these two cultures. It is about this conversation we are having, and I think it's no longer it's the others, right? And I think that what really separating one culture then from the other is the lack of information. And by staging project like this, it trigger a platform, and that platform, it's definitely enable us to talk about the relation of these two places, and also how to address issues I didn't think about. Canto 3 as will address a current issue in United States, which Alana talked about last week. It's the monument, and what do we do with monument, right? And I think it's just all of a sudden we start attaching another value to this project because it addresses something. It happened in Iraq long time ago, and it's happening now. Same thing when I said I was interested in talking to the veterans about the war because the guns fall silent for them. So their post-traumatic stress disorder is present. The Iraqis or the guns against Iraqi have not fall silent. So that day to come, and you could see how once you don't close the narrative of the project, you make it evolve, and it's somehow uh, the current on the present moment, it keep giving different meaning and life to this project.
And I may add that actually, the issue is even more global than just the two cultures. I mean, the Iraq U.S. sort of relationship is so complicated now and so intertwined that you can hardly watch a show on TV that doesn't have an angle that either a veteran or some relationship to Iraq. So, and Iraq has become part of the daily narrative in America. But as we saw in the Theater of Operation exhibition in MoMA PS1, it impacted the Gulf Wars, and invasion has impacted a larger context than just these two countries. Not only just because of personal involvements, the alliances, the coalitions, but because it's been lived by everyone and impacted one way or the other the personal growth of everyone. So there's that. But then, as Wafaa says, this issue of cultural erasure now is an issue in the US as well, with all the monuments and the discussion around them. And we didn't discuss this project much in terms of monument / anti-monument and what does that mean. But I see actually this project as performing differently to to America and to Iraq. For America, it may be resonating with the current, but also sort of the engagement and the problems with wars and all of that. But for Iraqis, as a maybe site of personal healing, because it is forcing them to look at the past, but also possibly comparing it to the current. Learn lessons. What did we learn out of having one dictator now disposed, and however supposedly we're transitioning into democracy, and what does that mean in terms of politics? And so I think it performs differently for different audiences, but I think it engages beyond just even Iraq and the US.
Yeah, I think also. Sorry, Andrew, go for it.
No, it's okay. I think it's such an interesting poetics that came out of the whole workshop series. Was what do we do with monuments of like dictators and these sort of fallen, disgraced people that we have in the United States too, as a part of this thing, and how do we learn from that past? And it was a really, really important point from the whole workshop series, and quite profound, I think.
Yeah, I think also it's gonna address the issue of space junk. I can't wait for. I mean, this is a real issue. Now there are companies who are going and collecting space junks, right? So I can't wait to see some images of Saddam's selfie among space junk behind him.
But maybe this becomes sort of a beginning of a project of let's send your dictators to space. Create a sculpture garden for them there.
Right, what to do with monuments you don't want. There's a question here that I think is interesting because it has been asked a lot and it's going to continue being asked. And it really weaves into this conversation that we keep having about, what to do with unwanted monuments and how quickly should monuments be removed and destroyed. And what does that mean in terms of continued historical trauma and continued access to history? So what do you think is going to happen? What's the reaction going to be from the followers of Saddam? I think you touched a little bit on this in our seminar before, but it's a very common and important question at the same time.
So I want you to speak about it because many people may not on the forum today may not know your background and your PhD, and you spoke really eloquently last week about monument and their significance. And in terms, I really don't know what's the follower of Saddam going to think about this project, to be honest. But I get the reaction of everyday Iraqi, and they saw as a moment to start the national conversation about the past and moving forward. But Rina, you could probably speak about the monument here, or the monument you talked about in Russia.
Well, I would say that one thing that immediately drew me to this work, and I met Wafaa and started talking to him pretty much my second day on the job here at San Jose State. This was this was a project that was left for me by Aaron Wilder, and that I kind of picked up, and I saw what Wafaa was doing, and I just was so fascinated in this question of, is it a monument or is it an anti-monument to Saddam Hussein? One of the central questions that we see around the world right now is what to do with unwanted monuments. Should we go ahead and get rid of them and erase the past? Or is there another way to approach them where you can take away some of their aura, take away some of their power, and yet not erase the history and really start a conversation? And for me, that's really what Canto 3 is able to do through satire, in the way that Wafaa has placed the CubeSat placed the bust inside the CubeSat with the selfie cam that's kind of making fun of Saddam's interest in constantly broadcasting his own image through the use of scale, minimizing, kind of literally minimizing from what was a 30-foot tall monument to now is just this tiny little bust floating in space. But also to allow for these questions to come forward. And I think the responsibility is that we don't know how people will necessarily react. And some of the followers may be super excited for a little bit when they see the sculpture go up into space, and then kind of their hopes will be immediately dashed when they realize that a CubeSat functions in this very specific way where it'll be in orbit for some time, and then it will be space junk. And then also the commercialization of the whole thing. And I see here someone put in the comments that it could be the same military complex that removed Hussein from power that enabled the vast development of the commercial industrial field that will ultimately send him into space. And I very much agree, as well as the changes that we see in space travel in general, the commercialization of space, that takes away the aura as well. And so I think the beauty of this really is the ways in which Wafaa has been able to not get rid of the monument itself, not forget the history, not forget the trauma, but rewrite the narrative and really engage people in the narrative in a different way.
I completely agree. And the last point you made is really important. While all of or most of the statue of Saddam's in Iraq being recycled for scrap metal, and it buried that image or erased it forever. This project is doing the opposite of that, right? It is bringing it to light, but bringing it to light also through humor. And I think once we enter that space, we enter a space of minimalism. You know, literally, you think larger than life, and you shrink it so small and in its physicality. And I think its impact on our mentality will be also shrunk at the same time.
Yes, absolutely. I wanted to, I know, Nada, you wrote an answer to this question, but I'd love to hear it live. This is from Rhonda Holberton, who writes, I'm interested in this idea of reenactment and healing. Do you think about this project as a reenactment? What role do you see the virtual component playing in the reenactment of desire, and whose desire?
Do you want me to answer it or Wafaa? I mean,
well, you started answering it, so maybe both of you.
Well, I was just sort of referencing the whole Ashura that Wafaa was talking about, the reenactment of the martyrdom of Hussein, which is the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad. And the reason why, I mean, it's a process of remembering as well as, forms of sorts of atonement, because there's the guilt, Iraqis would cry and Ashura, as they live the reenactment as if it's real and happening. Many religions have things like this, where the reenactment becomes a real replacement of the act, the historic act. So in a way, it is healing through remembering, but also an atonement, because realistically also, there is a lot of guilt in the Iraqi communities now. Yeah. Guilt of Iraqis in diaspora who survived, guilt, of not taking part of that, but also, those who are inside of Iraq, guilt on various levels. And so this also is part of the process of healing, is understanding how to deal with that guilt.
Yeah, and Nada, let's not forget the reason that Ashura take place. It is the guilt that is Iraqi did not defend Imam Hussein, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I love how things change because of time. And I've been talking to friends in Iran. In the past, of course, when they commemorate the Battle of Ashura and reenactment, they use horses. Now there are no horses, so they use motorcycles now. And you could see how completely the narrative shifted to, it's just like there is no parallel between, except the culture wanted to live through any new meaning to it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, the idea of guilt for not doing something to prevent that sort of horrible act of happening is also something that, because what first thing that happened after 2003 is that Iraqi was accused by the world for not acting against Saddam, right? How could you keep accept such a dictator? I mean, I may have mentioned this before, that one of the first things that journalists asked me after 2003 is, where's the art of protest? Definitely Iraqi artists, as supposed to be sort of liberal people, must have protested against Saddam. Where's the art of protest? And that sort of ignores completely the psychology of a dictator and the structure of the country, right? And so, the reality is that Iraqis have had to deal with this issue of, why didn't you do something while you were under Saddam, right? No one really understood the weight of living under Saddam, but also the idea of de-Baathification, accusing, well, you were Ba'athist and so you're bad. Well, 99% of the country were one way or the other, Ba'ath, part of the Ba'ath party, because that's the only way you survive, right? And it does not mean much other than you had to conform so you can survive. Not everyone can afford to leave the country, particularly as, not many other countries in the world were accepting Iraqi passports even as visitors. So it is a very complicated situation, and it's riddled by guilt and defensiveness on various levels.
And Neda, the world was not ready to get rid of Saddam. I mean,
Needed Saddam.
you go through the history in 1991, one of the largest uprising against the regime, and it was about to fall when other power interfered. To me, it's just like we have to look at the history of Iraq, not from just a Western point of view, but really talking to the people and unearth the story and how hard Iraqi trying to get rid of that regime.
Thank you. Well, as usually happens when this group gets together and starts talking, we are over time. So I just want to say a big thank you to Wafaa, Nada, and Andrew for this wonderful discussion. And a thank you to all the attendees at today's event. I would like to also thank students in Art 210, Interdisciplinary Graduate Seminar in Digital Media, Camila Avena Garcia, Mengshi Chen, Edward Ham, Imelda Josie Lepi, Jessica Prakash, Azra Sidoki, Kira Sisip, Kiki Wu, Jia Wu, and especially Aaron Arthur Chin for their help on this exhibition. Thank you also to Don Hansen and the New Art City team for their support, as well as a special thank you to Joel Slayton, Professor Emeritus at San Jose State University and founding director of the Cadre Laboratory for New Media, for advising on this project. I look forward to continuing to connect with all of you in New Art City and through the continuation of this work, as well as to welcoming you all to the Thompson Gallery, hopefully in person in 2022, to see the launch in the satellite feed. So thank you all for being here tonight, and let's all meet up in New Art City. So follow the link in the chat. And
Thank you so much. This has been really amazing.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you
you
all
so much.
for-
It has been a lot of fun. I'm
Yeah.
gonna miss you in my class next week.
Great. All right, you guys, have a great night.
Bye-bye, good night.
Bye.